Hi, everybody. I just turned my cell phone off, okay? Thank you for coming to tonight's program with two American women who wear social justice on their sleeves, Stacey Abrams and Lisa Ling. I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block, now in our 30th season. Thank you. I want to thank Stacey for coming back to Writer's Block and to welcome Lisa, because this is her first time. Before we get to tonight's program, I'd like to remind you that while we all appreciate free speech, we don't tonight. Tonight, the floor belongs only to Stacey and to Lisa. So if anyone makes our guests or speakers feel uncomfortable or unsafe, they will be removed. They will be removed. I mean, you know, okay. Now, erased. Now for tonight. It has never been, speaking of that, it has never been more clear that democracy, that freedom itself is under attack. This is no longer some abstract notion. So how can we, residents of Southern California, change this march deeper into authoritarianism and stop it in its tracks? Stacey Abrams has always spoken truth to power. That's who she is. Whether in politics or in her best-selling novels and nonfiction books, she talks justice writ large. Her new initiative is called the 10 Steps Campaign. It's a toolkit. It instructs us how to recognize authoritarianism and how to react. And it spells out how to build and rebuild power for us. There is nothing abstract about it. 10 steps. Lisa Ling has been focusing on social and cultural issues throughout her wildly impressive career. Considering her work on This Is Life with Lisa Ling on CNN, reporting for CBS News, The View on ABC, National Geographic Explorer, Oprah Winfrey, and others, she's covered more ground than most journalists could ever dream about. With her sister Laura, she's the author of the acclaimed nonfiction book, One Sister's Captivity in North Korea and the Other's Fight to Bring Her Home. So here's what's going to happen tonight. Lisa and Stacey will tell us about the 10 Steps campaign. When they're through, Stacey will take a few questions. And here's how it's going to work. It's not the same as we always do it. If you have questions, you raise your hand, and Stacey and Lisa will call on you individually, and then you will come to a mic here in the aisle. But there's going to be no lines at mics in the aisle. It's just you will be called on, and then you will make your way to a mic that will be in the aisle that will magically appear at some point. Please only approach the mics if you have been individually invited to do so. And no speeches at the mics. No speeches. That's reserved for me, okay? We know that many of you want to take advantage of Stacey's and Lisa's presence here tonight and take photos. And so I just told you to turn your cell phones off, but I'm telling you that when they come down the aisle, you welcome them, and then you can take pictures, you can stand up and take photos for like 20 seconds and then sit down, put your phones away, and enjoy the program and learn from it. Ladies and gentlemen, Stacey Abrams and Lisa Ling.
Okay, so Lisa and I are going to do something off-piste to start. Okay, so we're going to start over here.
We'll do the wave, Stacey, or
We're going to let them take pictures.
Okay, all right.
You can do the wave as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, but you got to not look like you're in a hostage
Okay,
video.
all right.
Okay. Okay, but y'all are going to sit down and do this so people behind you can take them too. There you go. We're not going anywhere. Like a really weird Sears portrait studio. And 3, 2, 2. I can't tell which. There you go. Come on. And there we go.
All right.
Okay, over here.
Moving on.
All right. Okay, so this half first. Okay, 5, 4, 72, 3, 2, somebody take video. 1, okay, over here. She's in charge of so much. Okay. 17. Okay. Oh, you got it? You got it. Okay, very good. Last one. Okay. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right.
Can we do the wave still? Let's start over here. Let's do the wave. Ready? All right. Okay. I always wanted to do that. Good evening, everyone. How are we feeling tonight? So glad to hear it. Before we jump into things, I wonder if you would just join me in taking a really long, deep breath before we start. This has been a hell of a year, and we're only in January still, so 3 seconds in through the nose and a long exhale as long as you can, okay? On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. All right. We feel better?
Sure.
I know I do. Look, we are we are in the midst of really unprecedented times. Our Constitution is being challenged in ways that it never has been since its drafting. Families are being torn apart. People are being murdered in American streets by agents of the state, only to be smeared by government officials who are offering anything but due process, which is why I think so many of us are just feeling so utterly helpless right now, and why I am so thrilled and honored to be sitting opposite you, Leader Stacey Abrams, because you have a plan called the 10 Steps campaign. And before we get into the 10 Steps campaign, I just want to ask you how you've been during this chaotic year, in particular this chaotic month.
Well, first, Lisa, I want to say thank you so much to you for agreeing to be our interlocutor here. I want to say thank you to Andrea Grossman. I'm going to embarrass him and thank Eduardo Negron Maldonado, who works with me and really conceptualized and helped pull all this together. Eduardo, raise your hand so everybody can smile at you. He's back there in the back. And I want to do that because part of the necessity of navigating this moment is that we've got to remember what we're grateful for and who makes things possible. And I also want you to think about the names. Ling, Negron Maldonado, Abrams, Katie Cabral, who hopes I don't point her out. We are a melting pot nation. And I made a decision earlier this year that I'm not running for governor in 2026 in Georgia. And the reason for that, amongst many things, is that I love this nation. I love Georgia. I love the South. And I loved your t-shirt. Don't throw it away yet. But in this moment, what I watched unfold over the last year has been a desecration of what I understand this country to believe in. And growing up in the South, it's not that I'm shocked by authoritarianism. We have state capture in the South. We have seen the misuse of executive power. We have seen the depredation directed towards communities of color. But we have never watched it happen at such a scale with such impunity since what preceded the Civil War. And so I am not someone who believes in optimism versus pessimism. I believe in determination. And so what I feel now is what I felt last year and what I felt in 2018 and what I've felt since I've been sentient to the notion of democracy as a construct. I'm determined to make this country what it deserves to be. And that, for me, is the only real emotion I can allow.
As you're talking, Stacey, I just have to ask you, most of us these days, while I think probably many of us in this room are still consuming news from mainstream media sources or legacy media, so many are just getting information from social media. And these algorithms are pushing us in such extreme directions. It certainly has played a major role in how we ended up here. But what are the forces that led us to this place right now?
I carbon date the current iteration of this wave of authoritarianism 1964, when Barry Goldwater ran for the presidency of the United States on an avowedly, we would call it conservative, but if you read what he wrote and listened to what he said, it was the precursors of what would become an ethno-fascist Christian nationalist narrative that got hijacked, and Heritage Foundation ran with it, and an entire ecosystem built up around it, but it reviled the notion of civil rights. It rejected voting rights. The assault on DEI is not new. DEI, diversity means all people, equity means fair access to opportunity, inclusion means respect for belonging. You cannot have a pluralistic democracy without those three component pieces. And so what we've watched happen in the last few years as the assault on DEI is really a very smart attack on pluralism and pluralistic democracy. And that started in earnest in the 20th century in 1964, because what happened? You guys here in California had this guy, and you made him governor, and then he thought he could just have everything, and he became president. And so if you go from Goldwater to Nixon to Reagan, you see the swelling of not just the architecture, but the diminution of what America was supposed to be. Because we had this stretch of time where we believed that the social contract meant that everyone got to have a part of it. The reason the 1950s, despite how rife with racism and sexism and xenophobia it still had the architecture for the kind of pluralism we believe in and the kind of opportunity we like to espouse. But what you saw happen starting with 64, coming into sharp relief in the 80s under Reagan, wasn't just telling us that we can't trust each other. We were told we can't trust government, we can't trust what we see. He dismantled the fairness doctrine, so that's when we started to see news no longer be news. It started to become propaganda. And all of this cascaded and then multiplied. And so social media is just another version of what has been happening for the last 60 years. But if we know it, we can't stop it, but we can subvert it, or we can at least navigate it. And so it started when we stopped believing that we were in this together. It started when, in the 20th century, when we reached an apex where more people were being invited into America's success, when the American dream was no longer allowed as a truism for a narrow community, when we believed that yes, if you were disabled, if you were a person of color, if you were an immigrant from a non-European country, America was for you. When that became the law of the land, the current regime was born. Bless you.
So,
Not them, the guy who sneezed.
so you have devised the 10 Steps campaign. Tell me about the roots of it.
So I want to give great credit to Dr. Kim Sheppel, who's a professor at Princeton. She is a historian who has really studied, historian and a political scientist who studied Hungary. And she and I were actually on a Zoom together for a foundation. I was there to talk about DEI because I believe DEI is the central pillar of how we save democracy. And she was there to tell us about how we're going to lose it. And she had this playbook. And as I listened to the playbook, I was like, that's such important information. And the way she contextualized it was really useful. I then appropriated some of it, remixed it, editorialized it. I asked for permission. She said I could. And I took some language that I thought that resonated more for what America was facing. And then I was asked to come and speak to a group of kids or young people who were part of the John Lewis Young Scholars Program through the Robert F. Kennedy Foundation, the good Robert Kennedy. And one of the students asked me if we would have a country by the time they graduated. And I said, I don't know. But I then started to tell them about these 10 steps that I'd heard. And that they were recording me, and then they put it on social media. And I was out selling a book. A few months later, I had a book on Code of Justice available wherever you get your books. I was doing a book tour for Code of Justice, and I was on the Jimmy Kimmel show. And Anthony Anderson had seen the video. And he said, can you tell us about the 10 steps? And I'm like, how did you hear about them? And when I went through it again, what I realized was that people were so hungry for a taxonomy. Like, we were being bombarded by crazy and cruelty and chaos and an intentionality to confuse us about what we knew. And the first step, if you're going to fight back, is you've got to recognize it. And so the genesis of the 10 Steps campaign was I wanted to give people 10 steps that they could use to recognize and to filter through what we were seeing. That it was all of a piece, that the Parks Department, the U.S., the National Park Service being defunded was part of the same intention as the ICE deportations, and that's also connected to why SNAP benefits have been cut. It's all part of the same thing, but you got to know what you're looking for. But if there are 10 steps to authoritarianism and autocracy, the other thing I wanted to understand, and that's just because I'm the daughter of pastors, but I'm also just a relentless believer that we can win, is that if there are 10 steps to authoritarianism and autocracy, there have to be 10 steps to freedom and power. And so I spent a lot of last year reading through all of the literature, all of the stories, and going back to the Dorchester model that Dr. King used, looking at other freedom fighters. And I put together, here are the 10 steps to freedom and power, and then decided other people should hear it, and thus the 10 Steps campaign was born.
Stacey, you talk about the 10 Steps to Autocracy playbook. One might argue that we are in the midst already of this autocracy, but I want to go through each of these steps and have you expound upon them. The first one is win the last fair election. I think this probably is surprising to a lot of people because Donald Trump did win this election, well, in this democratic process. He would dispute it previously until he won, but nevertheless. So how is that a component of autocracy?
So for those of us who are Gen X or older, we remember the rise of dictatorship and authoritarianism happening through coups d'etats, happening through monarchical behaviors. But the modern authoritarian wins elections. They just make sure it's the last one. They use economic populism. They break it and then they explain how they alone can fix it. And so if you're looking at Bukele in El Salvador or Duterte in the Philippines, if you're looking at Orban in Hungary, if you're looking at Chavez in Venezuela, when you see the rise of an economic populist, that is typically, and it doesn't have to be someone on the right, although it tends to be on the right. Economic populism is a great way for a strong man to take power, but you use the mechanisms. Like, people forget, Putin won an election. I remember Medvedev before, and I remember when Putin won that election. And I think Russians are like, yeah, we vaguely remember that too.
Decades ago.
But you win an election because you use the patina of democracy as a distraction so that you can do the next 9 steps.
Well, which brings me to my question before we get to the second hallmark of autocracy. So many people are really hoping that we get to these midterm elections, that there could be a possibility of change if we can only get to the midterm elections. How likely do you think it is that they will happen?
So we will have elections, and we'll talk about this at step 10.
Okay.
I'll give a preview.
Yeah.
There will be elections. Venezuela still has elections. Hungary still has elections. Turkey still has elections. The question is, are the outcomes preordained before a ballot is cast? And how they do that is step 10.
But what if there is a declaration of martial law?
Most authoritarians don't use declarations of martial law. Again, modern dictatorship, modern authoritarianism, modern autocracy, and just very quickly, autocracy typically is one person who holds all the power. Authoritarianism is a system of government where you aggregate power and you basically strip people of their right to decision-making and personal liberties, and you remove accountability for those in power. Dictatorship, you just tell people what to do, and dictators and autocrats are usually the same thing. But all of that is premised on, in the past, having to seize power and then deny others. You don't have to deny others the power anymore. You just rig the game so that they can never use it. There's a fantastic book called The Dictator's Learning Curve. It's by William Dobson. It came out in 2012, 2011. And he really traces how modern authoritarians have taken power. They don't have to declare martial law. If you get to martial law, it's because all the other things have failed. But they try to use everything else because it's a lot easier to manage an authoritarian regime where people are afraid and not in revolt. And so your modern authoritarian does just enough to keep you cowed, but not so angry that you push back.
So are the thousands and thousands of people who've taken to the streets in cities across America, is that helping? Are these protests helping? They
do. And so in the 10 steps to freedom and power, it does matter, but it's not enough. Because protests, when they end, when people go home, they go home to the same systems that existed before they went out into the streets. And so part of our responsibility is not to stop doing the protest, because part of the reason the protest has an external and internal intention. The external intention is to tell the power mongers that they are seen and that they are not accepted. The internal responsibility is to show people you're not alone. And so those marches matter. No Kings matters. What's happening in Minnesota and in Memphis and in New Orleans and here in LA and in San Francisco and in Portland and in Chicago and in Charlotte. And I just gave you a list of 9 cities under military occupation. When we protest, when we show up, it matters because we are telling ourselves and telling each other that we can still see what's possible. But it is an insufficient demonstration of power if you actually want to take power back. But I'll talk to you about how we get that in a second.
The second hallmark of autocracy is expand executive power.
2025. So, I mean, look, I know a lot of folks, and Sky Perryman, if you follow Democracy Forward, Sky Perryman and what she has been able to do in terms of lawsuits and really holding accountable this administration, even if the Supreme Court is not persuaded that they actually have the responsibility of protecting America and jurisprudence. Lower courts have said most of what he's doing is wrong, but not all of it. Because the expansion of executive authority is not simply breaking the Constitution. A lot of it is revealing what was never actually addressed, what we refer to as norms. There's a lot of stuff he's doing that is vile and cruel and wrong and entirely legal. And so part of our responsibility is that the expansion of executive authority is not inherently unconstitutional, but it can be wrong. But when we convince ourselves that if we don't like it, it's unconstitutional, we are bound then later on to not fix it because we think, well, as long as that person's not doing it, we'll go back to what we had before. We have had presidents who have expanded executive authority, but not with the grotesquerie and with the 24/7 news cycle that he has used. But Andrew Jackson and Andrew Johnson and Dwight Eisenhower all used executive authority to do horrific things to Americans and to people in this country, and they didn't break the Constitution to do it. And so this is about how do you expand executive power beyond what the populace understands executive power to allow.
Capture the other branches.
So if you remember Schoolhouse Rock, in theory, we have 3 branches of government. The first one is not the president. The first branch of government is the legislative branch of government. And as a former, or at least a recovering politician, I can tell you that it is anathema to me that so many men, and some women, but mostly men, who have worked so hard to show how important they are so willing to give up their power to someone else. It is extraordinary. I mean, Lisa, you've interviewed them. Like, the ego it takes that has been sublimated by the risk of not being in proximity to this power is what is so terrifying. So when you are in a democratic state, you do have these 2 other competing powers, and we saw Viktor Orban do this in Hungary. He took 10 years to do it, but he slowly but surely took over the legislature, and then he took over the judiciary. And now anything he wants gets passed, he signs it, and the courts approve it. We saw the same thing happen in Venezuela, but it also happened, if you heard about the president of Honduras, who was recently pardoned because the current administration hates drugs unless it's beneficial to their political ends.
Unless their country has oil.
Exactly. He took over, basically, he controlled the judiciary, he controlled the Congress, he controlled the Congress and he controlled the presidency. He couldn't control the judiciary, which is how they got rid of him. The same thing happened in Brazil. Bolsonaro had remarkable authority over the judiciary, over, again, the legislative, but not the judiciary. And so when the people rose up and they evicted him from the seat, unlike in the United States, he stayed gone. And so when you capture the competing powers, you weaken their ability to thwart you, but when you're really good at it, you use them as an extension of your existing power. And that's what we've watched happen. When Congress refuses to act, when the judiciary, when John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, says, essentially, we can't rule against him because we don't have the ability to enforce our decisions, so we're just not going to say no. That's step 3. And the last thing I'll say is this. We will talk about the current president, but he is an avatar. Our myopic focus on this man ignores the architecture that is being put in place, the architecture that got him there, the architecture that's scaffolding him while he's there, and the people who stand to inherit what will happen when he leaves. And that's why it's so important that we understand the weakening of the other 2 branches. because it doesn't just snap back with an election. So we'll have an election in 26, but 2026 cannot solve the proven infirmities of our tri-party, our tri-body system. And if we do not acknowledge that, we cannot fix it.
Do we need another breath? Okay, the next one, number 4, is gut the government.
So 2025, you gut the government. So it goes back to what I was saying about Reagan, who I think is undersold as someone who fomented much of what we are living through now. The only fight I ever got into in school was in second grade during the 1980 election, and Misty voted for Reagan, and I voted for Carter, and she called Carter some epithet, and she threw a book at me. I threw my desk at her because I believe in it. That was not right. And I learned that nonviolence is important because my parents were really clear about that. But it's the only time I got into fisticuffs for politics. But
It's second grade, but anyway, continue.
she was really wrong, and he was really bad. But what Reagan did, when he started to convince us that government should not work, he trained generations to not believe the evidence of their eyes. And then what happened in 2025 was that, having said that we didn't believe government could work, they started gutting it, and we suddenly realized, oh God, we do need it. That you do need a CDC that keeps us from dying from cured diseases. That we do need a National Park Service that doesn't let bears get us. That we should have a social safety net because poverty does exist, but so does economic depravity. That we need housing that's available. So all of the things government does, what they did was they gutted government because they wanted to break our will. They'd convinced us we didn't need it, so we hired someone who said he was going to get rid of it. And then he did exactly what he said. And now we're like, oh God, but why can't I get my Social Security check? Well, they fired everyone. Why can't I get my IEP for my kid? Because they dismantled the Department of Education. You gut government because people become despondent when they can't get what they need, but they don't remember whose fault it is. It becomes a pox on all your houses, and for authoritarians, that's perfect. Because then you can say, well, I alone can solve it, even though I broke it. But no one believes you broke it because they've been hearing for 60 years that it sucked. But then the second thing you do is you privatize it. You break NOAA so that we don't have weather balloons to tell us exact whether it's going to be 1 inch of snow or 13,000 inches of snow. But then you offer to sell that same technology back to meteorologists. And it just so happens that the guy in the Commerce Department who oversees NOAA happens to have a kid who has a company that does private weather service. And so you gut government not only to break our trust, but you also do it to expand your corruption.
That weatherman being Elon Musk, perhaps. Number 5, install loyalists.
Kristi Noem, Kash Patel. We have a podcaster who runs the FBI. Pete Hegseth. We have a former broadcaster who runs the Department of Defense and strides upon the stage like a dime store Patton. You have a snake oil salesman named Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's in charge of Health and Human Services. The person in charge of the Justice Department does not believe in justice. All of them have one thing in common. And Marco Rubio, who apparently has as many jobs as a skit in Living Color, he has no experience in the task that he has been assigned beyond committee hearings. But you want them not because they serve the people, they are wanted because they serve the power. And they fired everyone, or people quit, because they could not in good conscience sublimate the will of the people for proximity to power. You install loyalists because they will do your bidding and not the bidding of the people.
Yeah, what an extraordinary shift from the first term and the second. My favorite one, attack the media.
Yes. You attack the media, you attack the truth. Propaganda works best when there is no counter narrative. When, as Orwell told us, don't believe the evidence of your eyes. You go after the media, you consolidate it through extortion, you allow antitrust to no longer have any meaning, you gut public media by defunding NPR and PBS, but you also attack anyone who tells the truth. So you go after Karen Attiah, who writes a column that does not say anything that isn't true or isn't known. You go after Jimmy Kimmel. You go after anyone who tells the truth, and then just in case it's not working fast enough, you make certain that oligarchs buy up everything else. And so TikTok falls, and CBS falls, and depending on what happens in this bidding war, CNN falls. And while legacy media may not have the salience it used to have, it still reaches millions of people. And what you have is the, not just attack on the truth, you have a gateway drug to propaganda that has no antidote. And that's what they're after.
In some ways, though, when you think about it, social media can fill a truth void.
In fact, it was doing so effectively that Larry Ellison bought it. TikTok
Yeah.
was doing a really good job, so much so that an entire generation had full access to national and international truth.
Yeah.
And the algorithm couldn't figure out how to take it from them. And so they just bought the whole thing. And they will Twitterfy TikTok in about 6 months. We've already lost Meta. And so we are watching, though, in this moment, the rise of those who are trying to be shoots in the ground to replace. But the problem is scale. And the scale of the attack on the truth is something we have not seen since the 1920s when Hearst owned everything, because even then there were some constraints. You had Ida B. Wells, who was still telling the truth about lynchings. You had reporters and local papers that were out there doing the work. We are now in a moment where they have decimated journalism, but also decimated the channels. But they cannot take away our need for the truth. And so we have someone like Lisa Ling who's going to find a way to tell it to us no matter what she has to do. So thank you.
By sitting alongside people like Stacey Abrams. Number 7, scapegoat vulnerable communities.
So we've seen this play out. The most obvious one, of course, is Nazi Germany, but before and after, we have seen it happen. In Hungary, Orban has targeted the LGBTQ plus community. In Turkey, there has been the attack on the Kurds. There are debates about whether or not India is full authoritarian or competitive authoritarian, but Modi's attention and attack on the Muslim population signals how this works. And in the United States, it's complicated. We don't have just one. We are the most diverse nation on earth in terms of the sheer volume of every single kind of person. And that's why DEI has been such a boogeyman for them. We've done a really good job of giving them a very efficient target. You just say DEI and you get everyone you don't like, every marginalized, disadvantaged, and vulnerable population, because DEI covers all of it. The initial, when democracy has worked best, it was when we solved for the challenges facing these communities. 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment. But it was also the Chicano movement. It was the fact that Native Americans were not citizens in this country until 1921 and gave rise to the American Indian movement. It was the women's rights movement, the LGBTQ plus movement. But it took until 1990 until we decided that the disabled had a right to full access to America, and we still are bad at it. but we wouldn't even acknowledge it until then. And so when we think about DEI, DEI isn't just whether or not black kids get to go to Harvard or a boring HR seminar. It is a protective infrastructure we have built in this nation since its inception to protect, but also to create a pathway to opportunity. You are not guaranteed equality of outcome, but DEI says that you have fairness of access. And if you are pursuing a Christian nationalist, proto-natalist, ethno-fascist nation, DEI is your worst enemy. And therefore, you have to go after immigrants, and you go after women. And I'll get off my soapbox in 1 second, or I won't. I'll just step up to the side. But we focused on Students for Fair Admissions, which was the anti-DEI decision that happened in 2023. But it was the third one that has happened in recent years. The first one was Shelby v. Holder. When you dismantle the Voting Rights Act, that was the first one. The second one was the Dobbs decision. And here's why. In America, there are 3 pathways to opportunity into the American dream. Education, what you know, the economy, what you do, and elections, who's in charge. Well, you want to go after elections, dismantle the Voting Rights Act, which in 1965 gave black people for the first time full participation in elections, and in 1975 added Latino and AAPI communities and gave them those protections. You go after the economy. Well, who has made things harder for white men? Women. They're not mad about merit, they're mad about competition. And too many women have too many jobs that people think they shouldn't have to compete for. And so the Dobbs decision that stripped women of bodily autonomy was a decision designed to say that proto-natalism and traditional gender roles are the only way for America to work. And the third, you have to go after education. In the United States, right now, if you apply to college, they can let you in because of your gender, your height, what they had for lunch on Thursday, but they cannot use race. It's the only thing they can't use. Because what happened? We suddenly saw an influx of communities of color who had largely been sublimated to second and third class citizenship educationally finally start to rise. You go after immigrants because not that they are taking from us, but because they have shown us that there is more that's available to all of us. That's why step 7 is so dangerous. You cannot have a pluralistic democracy without the pluralism. And DEI is how America has made pluralism work.
And immigration is at the top of that playbook. Number 8, destroy support systems.
So, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, you all have seen this. When authoritarianism settles in, it goes after its targets, but it has to also defeat the avengers. And that's usually universities who train young people to think critically and to fight back, bless you. You go after the law firms who get the rabble-rousers and the protesters out of jail and who hold the systems accountable. You go after philanthropies who fund that good work. You go after anyone who makes it possible for good to happen. You go after ICU nurses who simply say that it is wrong to harm someone, and I will film it. What we have watched happen in real time is because if you do not destroy the support systems, then people will believe that it's possible for us to survive authoritarianism and take our country back.
Normalize violence.
In 2024, there were 11 deaths for people who were in ICE, CBP, or DHS custody. In 2025, it was 32. And in January, we're already at 9. Renee Good, Alex Preddy are the two names we know, because it shocks the conscience of America that their status did not protect them. And you normalize state violence by making it seem so constant that no one is safe unless they are silent. We have, I gave the litany earlier, we have multiple cities under military occupation right now. When the National Guard is called into a city, when they take up post and they don't leave, even after a court has said to go, that is a military occupation. The nation's capital is under military occupation. And let's be clear, if we were reading that headline, if we still have the news, if we were reading that headline from any other country, we would be appalled. But we now just think, oh, okay. The National Guard invaded New Orleans, Memphis. When's the last time there was a hotbed of insurrection in Memphis? They're in Lewiston, Maine. Raise your hand if you can find Lewiston, Maine on a map. Show off. For the rest of us, my point stands. They are doing their best to normalize state violence, and the way you do that is that you put military occupation in place, and then we get used to it. You send in 3,000 ICE agents. They now outnumber all of the law enforcement in Minnesota. And you shoot a man lying prostrate on the ground for using his First and Second Amendment rights. You normalize state violence because we shake our heads and we are saddened and then we go about our business. But what we have to take from that is that there is no status in America any longer that protects you, because now the law enforcement is above the law.
Finally, end democracy itself.
Texas. So, as I said earlier, you don't have to cancel elections. You just have to make certain those elections don't count. I have a little bit of experience with this, where voter suppression denied access. I was not entitled to win anything. No one is entitled to win an election. I never once filed a suit to make myself the victor. But the lawsuits we filed and the lawsuits we supported were about making sure the system protected voters. They have the exact opposite intent. The reason you redraw the lines in Texas, in Missouri, in North Carolina, in Florida, the reason Ohio tried to do it, the reason Indiana showed a backbone, you draw the lines because you know that you're going to have elections, and if you can't stop people from voting, you make sure there's nothing for them to vote for. Then you have the Calais decision. Sitting in front of the Supreme Court right now is a decision that, if it is effective, it was brought by white voters in Louisiana who were upset that now that blacks comprise 1/5 of the population, they would like 2 seats in Congress. And the fact that they got 2 seats because this Supreme Court said they are entitled to 2 seats, this group of people brought their lawsuit saying not only should they not get these 2 seats, but racism no longer counts in America. It's all solved now. And so you should gut Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. If that happens, more than 20 seats currently in Congress held because the drawing of lines requires the consideration of communities of interest driven by racial issues, because in the United States, race is the strongest proxy of political leanings, but is also one of the best proxies for political need. The Calais decision will mean that those seats vanish, which means we will no longer have a Congress, we will have a Russian Duma for a generation. That's number 2. Number 3, today, the FBI raided Fulton County, Georgia, and seized hundreds of boxes of 2020 related election materials. Why? Because they are trying to steal the voter rolls from across the country. Most secretaries of state have said no, including in Minnesota, where Tim Walz was told, well, if you'll just give us your voter rolls, we'll stop killing your people. But they're trying to do this across the country. Georgia refused to give those rolls. Well, now they've seized the rolls in Fulton County. What is Fulton County? The single largest county in the state, 1 million people, but it's also a very handy referent if you also have ICE posting up a little farther south, because when we think about immigration, they now have the imprimatur because of Brett Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh, the Kavanaugh stops, which now say that you can use race, accent, or language as a predicate for seizing and deporting people. Well, in the South, Black immigration, Latino immigration, and Asian immigration are all pretty big. And now you've got a list, okay? So those are just three random examples of how you make certain that we have elections, but it's the last time that they're free. They were free and fair the last time we voted. Because you'll be able to go cast your ballot. But before you cast your ballot, they'll decide who gets to vote, what they get to vote on, and if they have their druthers, they will make certain that the answers that we get are the answers they wrote down before we took the test. Yay, America.
So Stacey, where would you say we are? You just highlighted those 10 hallmarks of autocracy. Where would you say we are right now?
We passed all 10 steps back in July. We are now, no, according to the Democracy Index, we are now a competitive authoritarian nation. Another term of art for it is anocracy. So we have just enough democracy left that we can remember what it looks like, but enough authoritarianism that it's soon to be a faint memory. So we are a competitive authoritarian nation. And this election in 26 is going to help us stay competitive, but it is insufficient to solve it. But I think we're going to talk about what can.
Exactly. I mean, because we are only 1 year into this presidency, but as you said, the architecture has already been set. So let's talk about the steps to combat autocracy, starting with commit, number one. Talk about how we can commit.
So the 10 Steps campaign is a wayfinder. Raise your hand if you remember malls. There we go.
Shopping malls?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, look, I have to meet my audience where they are. So I think about it as a mall. You've got to come in and you've got to find your fight. Like, how are you going to fight back against authoritarianism? So you look for your shoes, and they give you the list of all the shops in the mall that sell shoes. And you figure out you need the one that sells shoes for people who, walk sideways. Great. But then you got to figure out where to go in the mall physically. So then you have that big map that's got the squares, you are here, and you're trying to find the number that corresponds. 10 Steps campaign is that wayfinder. We're there to help you figure out which of the 10 things we can do, the 10 steps to freedom and power. What do you want to do? And then where do you go to do it?
Can you give us some examples of ways?
I would love to. And because I think I'm talking a bit much, I'm going to kind of mix them up together as I go.
Good.
Okay, so we start with commit. Commit simply means accept where we are. We've got some folks in Washington, D.C. who seem to still be confused. And that's an important thing, because if we do not commit to understanding that we are under an authoritarian regime, we are going to continue to see performative pragmatism from our elected leaders. They are fighting a 1980s fight. They are still debating politics as though this is a question of how we get to the goal. Joshua Doss said it, and I paraphrase a lot of folks, but I give him credit. And he said, it used to be that we all had the same destination. We just argued in our political parties about the route we were going to take. We're going to use Waze, Google Maps, we're going to use Google Maps, Apple Maps, and if you're a libertarian, you use Waze. But we all had the same plan and the same place we were trying to get to. We are no longer going to the same destination. They are using authoritarianism as the route to ethno-fascist, Christian nationalist, proto-natalism, and I'm not making it up because J.D. Vance told us, as did Trump, Miller, Kristi Noem, and anybody who went to CPAC, okay? On the other side are those of us who believe in democracy as the path to pluralism and the American dream. We cannot keep fighting a political fight where we think we're still arguing over the route. We have to have the commitment to know that the destinations are different, which means the fight has to be different. So that's first. Second is then we share what we know. Once we've committed, we got to tell people. Because they've attacked the truth, because they've attacked the media, we have to tell our own truth. We have to share what we know. We cannot share disinformation. And that means don't repeat the lie so people know the truth. When you repeat the lie, all people remember was the lie. And now they've heard you tell it. And they're like, well, I read that this happened. They won't remember anything they saw after, assuming they read all the way through. We've got to tell the truth, but we have to share what we know and share how we know it. 3, we have to organize. I'm the daughter of 2 pastors. And one thing you learn when you're a PK is the scripture in the Bible, especially if you're a PK in the Deep South, where there's nobody, that where 2 or more gathered, there is church. When there are 3 to 4, you got choir, add 5, you've got usher board. So we have to be willing to organize ourselves. And that doesn't mean that you have to be a part of some massive movement. It means that you find 3 friends who share your fears. And you commit to talking about it, you share ideas, and then you think, what can we do? That's organizing. And then when you go and do something, when you go and walk a child home from school, surrounding her so she can't be snatched by ICE, that's mobilizing. When you organize a food pantry to help all of the people who are being arrested because the Supreme Court said it's okay to arrest the unhoused and the homeless, when you solve for that, that's mobilizing. And that decision by the Supreme Court is as much about authoritarianism as the ICE raids. Those are not separate. Those are they have the same DNA, making certain people know they don't belong in the America they envision. But when we mobilize to solve for it, that's how we hit the critical mass. That's when protest turns into actual action. Next, we have to litigate. And that means not just filing lawsuits, although that is a huge and important thing. So fund organizations that file lawsuits. If you were a member of the ACLU and you quit, come on back, even if they ticked you off for some reason. Democracy Forward is amazing. The Immigration Legal Resource Center is fantastic. But fund the lawsuits. We don't have to win everything, but we have to fight everything. People forget how many cases Thurgood Marshall lost before he won. Laws do not change overnight. We remember the decisions, we forget the building block. And we have to fight it because we've got to have a record of how we got here. When we forget that, especially in the law, that is when they fill the vacuum with venom and vitriol, and they lie to us about what happened. So we have to fight every fight. But litigating is also just arguing. Don't let somebody tell you the sky is purple when you know it's not. You're not going to convince them. That's not the point. I don't think anybody in this room has ever actually won an argument. But you don't argue because you're trying to convert someone. You're trying to convince them that the answer that you offer might be something they want to hold on to. So they don't have to agree with you, but they have to hear you. So we got to litigate. We have to disrupt. What is happening in Minnesota is disruption. What is happening, what you all did here, you all ran folks out of LA. They keep coming back, but they don't stay long. Y'all are like the Teflon city because you disrupted. You found ways to show your strength and your power. That does not stop when the pain stops because it doesn't stop, it just shifts. So we've got to keep being disruptive. But we also have to deny them the ability to tell us who and what we are. So part of disruption is film everything, record everything, report everything. Disrupt systems, even if you like the system. Make it hard for them to hurt us. But we also have to deny them the right to tell us that we're wrong for doing so. and this one is important. I talk about DEI everywhere. And in 2018, when I didn't win my election, I got into a little bit of trouble because I acknowledged that I didn't win. I even acknowledged the guy who won. But I refused to use the term of art they told me I had to say. I refused to say I concede because concession has meaning. And at the time, it meant that I was saying the system itself was correct, and it was not. I believe that language matters. I'm sitting in a room of people who know that words matter. We cannot let them change our language to accommodate their propaganda. We cannot let them strip us of our identity to give primacy to their own. And it hurts, and it's awkward, and it's uncomfortable. And they will say really mean things about you on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere else. But the reality is we have to deny them the ability to change our language. The fact that so many people have spent so many hours trying to rearrange the letters DEI, they're not mad about the letters. They're mad about the mission. Abortion was never about whether it was right to choose. They were mad about a woman's right to control her body. And we let them pull us into these arguments of language because they know better than we do that if they can change our language, they can change our minds. We have to believe that we have the right to deny their propaganda. We then have to engage. We have to keep calling your congressman, but call your mayor and your city council member and your school board members. AI is as dangerous as it is promising. And if there is not a rule about what AI can, and there was a good law that got signed, a better law that did not. But now is the time for us to move for AI legislation because this administration and the oligarchs are racing as fast as they can, hoping we don't notice. I wrote a book about AI because I don't think AI is good or bad. It is a tool, and tools can build and tools can destroy. But we have to engage on issues that irritate us or that don't interest us. Because if so many people are talking about it, if you don't know about it, it's probably not intended for your benefit. And we have to engage not only on the things that we see that we're afraid of, but on the things that they tell us not to pay attention to. Because it's 2026, we have to elect people. We have to elect people. But elections aren't enough. They are an insufficient solution to the loss of a nation. And that gets me to my favorite step in all the paper that you're holding. What is step 10?
Demand.
And what does it say we demand?
Well, I can't read it without my
I will.
read it.
Yes.
It's not enough to just reclaim what we had. We must demand more and build a better government. Be clear about what we deserve from our allies and from those who would destroy democracy. Don't meekly ask for what we think we can get. Declare what kind of country we intend to build, then get to work.
There we go. So what she said.
So tell us how we can do this, Stacey.
So very proud that last week we announced our first set of partners. Almost 30 organizations have agreed to join us. And the whole point of the campaign is that I'm the shill. I'm out there talking about it to everyone, but it's not about me. It's not about any of the orgs that we have. It's about the people that we can serve. And the Wayfinder is designed to connect us. So for example, we launched a project called Just Fix It, and that was designed to raise attention to the stories facing what's happening with healthcare. We are right now helping a group of students who want to do more around immigration in the places where ICE hasn't gotten, but they're coming. And so we're helping them connect the dots and find supports. Tell us what you need, but more importantly, sign up at 10stepscampaign.org. Tell people about it. We've got the QR codes. We need thousands and thousands and thousands of people, and here's why. Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan did research. Civil resistance works. Nonviolent civil resistance works. Nonviolent is not the same as peaceful. When you hear people say peaceful, replace it with nonviolent, because peaceful is passive. Nonviolent says that we will not take up arms, but it does not mean that we will not protest, disrupt, and be civilly disobedient. But don't do it yourself, don't do it alone, and don't do it without training. So join the 10 Steps campaign and we can connect you to who can get you done.
All right, we have a little time for some questions. So if you raise your hand, and I'll ask you to just step to the microphone so everyone can hear you. I'm going to call on you in the middle, but why don't you start heading toward the microphone? In the meantime, I'll call on someone who's closer to a microphone right here on the end. If you could just approach the microphone, or whoever gets there first.
Good evening. Thank you, Stacey. Very informative. You touched on a lot of subjects. I just wanted to ask you about disruption. And in addition to protesting, boycotting, the roles that corporations play in where we are right now. Can you talk? I'm sorry, I'm out of breath a little bit. Excuse me. Can you talk a little bit about how effective boycotting is? You know, we all have the Target example, but I think we need to do more, and how money and the lack of spending sends a signal.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Recognize who's profiting from this.
So boycotts are an effective tool, but they take time. The Montgomery bus boycott took more than a year. The farm labor great boycott took, I think, 7 years the first time. The second time, they just stopped because boycotts are salient and effective, but they take time, they require structure, and they do not have, the cinematic effect that we're used to imagining as the outcome. That said, they are still useful. Target understands that they're useful. But so does Costco, because sometimes it's about pointing out what has gone wrong and who's made mistakes, and sometimes it's about celebrating who's doing right. And we have to be as loud in our celebration as we are in our diminution, because otherwise there is no benefit to doing right. And so I believe in both positive engagement as well as punitive boycotts. But I also believe that personal choice matters. You don't have to have everyone join you to know not to do it. So even though the great boycott didn't necessarily have the same effect when I joined it when I was in college, I didn't eat Raisin Bran Crunch for 4 years, and I'm still mad about it. That was my favorite cereal. But I made a choice, and the thing is, it builds our muscle memory. Every time I chose not to have something I wanted, I realized that deprivation did not destroy me. We have to start getting used to not having what we want. That's how America survives authoritarianism. We have such privilege, even those of us who do not enjoy real privilege. There is a set of privileges that we believe are ours, and if we do not start practicing sacrifice, we will not survive authoritarianism.
Sir, why don't you approach the microphone and we'll come over here to this question.
Thank you. So my question has to do with, I guess, the relationship between autocracy, democracy, and capitalism, which is how do we address the wealth that I think is behind a lot of the autocracy, while also maintaining our ideals of the American dream and American opportunity.
Sure. So I did not realize I'd gone back to Yale. Okay. No, I'm joking. This is a great question. So here's the thing. Let's understand what these systems are designed to do. Democracy is not a guarantee of anything, but it is the most effective tool of participation that modern politics has ever devised. We've tried other things, but democracy is the one way that we have said to everyone, with remarkably notable exceptions, like prisoners in most of our states, like ex-offenders. I mean, we can go through that. But democracy as a goal says that as many people as possible get to participate in having a say in the shape of what we do. And that goes back to what I said. There are three things: education, what you know; the economy, what you do; elections, who's in charge. Democracy gives us a voice in those things. How we use that tool is then shaped by the kind of country we want to have. We have seen this nation effectively manage its capital to the benefit of more than a few folks. And the rich people didn't like it. And we allow ourselves to be convinced that there was some better opportunity if we let the really rich people hoard everything and let it trickle down to us. Milton Friedman lied. And so part of our responsibility is that we have to recognize that democracy and capitalism are not the same things. Democracy is a political system. Capitalism is an economic system. I happen to be a capitalist who can critique capitalism for having deep and abiding flaws that allow the aggregation of wealth and actually no longer reflects what capitalism was supposed to do, which was create a competitive environment, because when you have the hoarding of wealth, the removal of regulation, and the absolute ability to crowd out competition, that's no longer capitalism. You can call it what you want, but that's not what it is. But we can't get to that argument if we are not allowed to speak. And so our current responsibility is to fight for democracy towards the end and through the process. And this goes back to the boycott question. We can do two things at once. We can chew gum and walk at the same time. And that's why the 10th requirement of fighting back is that we have to demand what we actually deserve. There is no better time to argue for the imagination of an economy that is just than in a moment when the economy is so unjust and the hardship is so real that people give themselves the freedom to imagine. I'm sitting in a room with people who should be imagining what we want. We should be writing it down. Now is the time for the flights of fancy that lead to the nation we deserve. But we are so busy trying to preserve what we had that we forget to ask for what we need. And so I have no issue with capitalism. I have an issue with how it's done, who it benefits, and the fact that we don't do a thing about making it better. Those are the things we should be fighting for. So it's not just stop being mean. It is you need to do better, and I'm only going to hire people who agree to do better, but I'm also going to tell them what better looks like, and I can't do that if I don't engage, if I don't organize, if I don't mobilize, and if I don't disrupt the systems that they put in place.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about voter ID. I've had this conversation recently, and I always find that I'm inadequately prepared to counter the conversation. So I don't think voter ID is necessary. It's not, we don't have voter ID laws in California that I'm aware of. And my brother tonight asked me, because he's of a different political stripe from me, he said, well, how do they know it's you when you go to vote? I said, I don't know, but they do. And we don't have a lot of massive fraud around it, because I don't read about it, I don't see it, I don't hear about it. And yet I'm told when I go to other kinds of political conversations, oh, do you know about all the illegals who registered here and voted? But I don't see it. Now, I know in other states, they have voter ID laws to a certain extent, and it works. So my question is, one, I don't feel that they're necessary, but how do I counter the conversation whenever it's brought up to me? How do I do it effectively?
Sure. Andrea, are you still in here? I am. Okay, hold up your book.
It's an iPad.
Okay. Well, okay, so I have a book called Our Time Is Now, where I go through a lot of this, but I'll give you the shorthand. So you were about to be, no, don't go get it. You were going to be my Vanna White, but you failed. Sit down. No,
And am I done? Can I go sit down?
You can sit down as well. Okay. So here's the thing. Voter ID is fine. We have always had voter ID. You've always had to prove who you are to cast a ballot. The issue is, what kind of ID have you had to have? In every state in this nation, you've always had to prove that you're not somebody else. But we've allowed for an expansive list of ways to prove it. At the very beginning, it was that your neighbor knew who you were, so you had people vouching for you. If you didn't look like John, you didn't get to cast John's ballot. And so it's never been true that people oppose voter identification. What we oppose is identification laws that are made so strict as to crowd out eligible people and making it so complicated that the threshold for participation is an impossibility. I'll give you 3 examples to use. Number 1, by the Heritage Foundation's own admission, the number of fraudulent voter registrations is so infinitesimal that it is more likely that you would be struck by lightning twice than that you would vote using a fraudulent ID. When people have voted when they weren't permitted to, it is often because we have confusing laws. We have 50 states, and we do not have a single, thank you. It wasn't a challenge to you. I know you're awesome. I apologize. She's going to show you the book. Our Time Is Now, The Fight for Fair Democracy. I'm going to give it back to you. Yes, ma'am. Anyway, here's the book where I talk about all the things that we need to know about how to shape democracy. Take it back. Come on. We make you work too hard, sorry. Anyway, so number 1, voter fraud. What they call voter fraud is often misunderstanding, because we do not have a single democracy in this country. We have 50 different states with different rules, and then we've got 3,000 counties that have different interpretations of the rules that we have. So voter fraud does not exist at any real cognizable level, and it has never changed the outcome of an election that could have been solved with voter ID. Often when this has been an issue, it's because people in power circumvented the system, not because somebody pretended to be somebody else. So that's the first thing. Second thing, in North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp won an election in 2016. She became U.S. Senator, in part because the Sioux Indian tribe voted because they had been part of the Standing Rock protest against the pipeline. In response, the state of North Dakota changed the law to say that if you were a member of that, if you were Native American and lived on a reservation, you had to have a street address on your ID. Okay? No, because most of us have a street address on our ID. Except in North Dakota, the county had to agree to give you that street address. The reservation did not have the authority. And the county refused. And so they went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, your population is so de minimis, the idea that you have to have a street address makes sense. The fact that only your population is affected by this is not our problem. And so it was not that they had to have a street address, it was that the rule that was put in place, which on its face seemed logical, was targeted to deny them the right to participate. Third one, Wisconsin. 2016, a black woman who was born in the South during Jim Crow could not vote for the first time since 1965. Why? Because Wisconsin changed their law to say that you had to have an original certified birth certificate. We started talking about those around 2008. You can remember why. Well, if you were born in the Deep South during Jim Crow, you are likely not allowed to be born in a hospital if you were black. The only way you can get an original certified birth certificate that's issued by a hospital is if you're born there. Most black people from that era, have county-issued birth certificates. This woman was denied the right to vote in the 2016 election because the voter ID law on its face seemed perfectly logical. And this is what they're using right now for this immigration idea, that you have to be able to show your birth certificate and you have to be able to prove your citizenship. The threshold for proof is the problem. Not that you have to prove it, but the threshold they're requiring, when you make it impossible to comply, then the system is not fair. So when your brother brings it up again, ask him, does he think it's fair to have an impossible standard to prove that you are a citizen in this country, especially if you are Native American and black? And if he says that's okay, you should really look for a new family.
Yes, ma'am. And if we could have the person who had their hand up here start walking down to the microphone.
Thank you. This has been great. My name is Connie, and I'm a retired teacher at Cal State LA, and one of my colleagues who I've mentored teaches a policy class, an undergrad policy class. So I asked her early October, do the students know about Prop 50? I'd be happy to come and talk, because I got to vote in one of the first under 21-year-olds back in 1972. She asked the students, 2/3 knew what it was a month before the election, Prop 50, and a third didn't. I said, this is great. So then the students actually organized a panel and invited Lydia Camarillo, who you probably know, who has helped to get Latinx voters. And so now, 2 months after this election, new semester, new class, policy class, she says, how many of you know about Prop 50? One student raised their hand. These are people who are in school and they're in a policy class, social work. The question is, how can we get more younger people involved? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So there are a few things. One is that we have to meet people where they are, not where we want them to be. Young people are not turning on CNN. They are not going to show up always at fora like this. And so our expectation has to be adapted. We also have to remember that most of us weren't here either. And so our first responsibility is we've got to be more inventive about how we share information. We cannot hope that it happens by osmosis or proximity. We have to be intentional about delivery systems. Number two, we have to recognize that only 30% of young people are actually encouraged to register to vote. So when we bemoaned how few actually turn out, it's because we don't do the work of actually showing them why voting matters or giving them the mechanisms. It's like telling someone you should learn how to drive, but they've never seen a car.
Right.
And so part of our responsibility is to connect the action of voting to their understanding of what it can yield. And the third and most important is that we have to give these young people grace. They are the first generation since Reconstruction to lose civil rights during their lifetime. They grew up under the specter of school shootings, environmental degradation, and they have watched the people who are in charge tell them over and over again, we can do nothing about it. Why would you participate in a system where the people in charge of the system tell you the system will not work? And so part of our responsibility in this crisis, and this goes back to the other question, we have to use these crises as opportunities for connection. We've got to show up and stop lecturing and start asking. Because this is also a generation that has more access to information than any generation in human history, but information is not the same as knowledge. But we chastise them for not knowing, but we've never done the work to make certain we connect the dots. So we have an affirmative responsibility, not to lecture, although if they show up in your class, take advantage of it. But we have to meet them where they are. We have to offer concrete connective tissue. But then we have to admit that sometimes it doesn't work the right way, but now is the time that they can start to seize the power, because the power is up for grabs. In an authoritarian regime, now is the time to seize the power we need for the world we want, and they get to be in charge because they're going to outlast us all. So that's what I would say. Okay, you get to ask the last question, make
Actually,
it thoughtful.
well, we have
okay,
someone
one more.
asking, so we'll do 2 more questions. And then
I can't, thank you. I can't tell you how much I'm getting out of this. It's just, yay. My husband's family and some friends of mine are full-on cult MAGA. And I liked your point about one of the steps, and I'm going to review it, how to engage, how to engage. There is no talking, and really, we can't even spend holidays together anymore. And I just, it's upsetting, and I guess my question is, how do you deal with family members, close friends, who are full-on MAGA?
Okay.
do you have any friends who are full on that?
That's not really a problem I have. There might be some self-selection happening with me. But what you're saying is a legitimate issue. So part of my job when I was minority leader was that they call you leader to tell you you have power. They put minority in front of it so you recognize that's a joke. I could only get things done if I could work with people who had divergent ideological positions from my own. And as I mentioned before, my parents are pastors. Like, their job is conversion. Their job is to help you save your soul. They will know if they are correct when you're dead. Because either, I have neither that interest nor that amount of time. I don't try to convert. So that's my first thing. Conversion is about transforming someone's ideological belief systems. People hold beliefs to be true. Can anybody in this room be convinced right now that authoritarianism is great?
No.
That ethno-fascism is the way to go? Is there any set of then why do we think we can do that for someone else? So we have to stop trying to convert people and focus on convincing. Because the convincing piece is, what is it that you need that our alignment lets us get? You don't have to do it for the same reasons, but if we get the same outcome, I'm good. My example is that when I was minority leader, there was an anti-environmental bill, sailed through the Senate. The speaker loved it, the lieutenant governor loved it, the governor loved it, the Chamber of Commerce loved it, the Senate agreed to it, came to the House, and they were certain it was going to pass. And I asked my frenemy, who was the head of the Tea Party, to have lunch with me. And I'm like, look, you don't believe in climate change. She's like, no. She didn't say it was God crying, but it's pretty much that thought. And I said, but you do believe in property values, right? She's like, yeah. And I said, well, if they pass this law, the runoff will diminish the property values for your constituents. But do you think they're going to reduce their tax burden because of it? And she was like, no. We stopped that bill for 3 years. They finally gave up. Now, I use that example because I didn't convince her to agree with me on climate change. My rationale was environmental. Hers was economic, but we got the same outcome. So right now, do not try to convince someone who believes that they are righteous, that they are wrong. Convince them that they are losing power because the people who are coming after us now are coming after them next. And then the underlying thing, and I think we have to hold this, and this is the hardest piece. I do not understand, as a core value system, what the moderate position on racism is. What is the centrist position on hatred? What's the permissible amount of vilification of a child who is struggling with identity? Economic worry is an insufficient justification for denying someone's humanity. And we have to hold that as a truth. I am not willing to compromise my values to justify your vote. But what I can do is work with you to make sure we all get to vote again, and the next time, make sure you lose.
Thank you.
Okay.
Last
You get the
question.
last question, make it thoughtful, transformative, and the most important question ever. Go.
No pressure. As someone who's been on the front lines since June 8th, thank you for what you said about LA and how we've stood up and what we've done here. Thank you very much. And in the nonviolent versus peaceful protest, I have a big question about that. So thank you for the difference. When there is a population that is trying to nonviolently protest in a city and nonviolently protest against this authoritarian regime, but the government in place will not allow it, they're complicit, they're helping the authoritarian regime while also pretending to support you. How does that population fight and stand up without, I'm just scared for my city right now. I'm really scared for my city.
I appreciate that. And no, you need to stand for a second.
Okay, so everyone ran away.
No. So what students of civil resistance whisper, but know to be true, is that violence beget by resistors rarely succeeds because the opponent that you face simply has all of the tools.
Yeah.
They have more, they have bigger, and they have a relentless capacity. It is a rare occasion where violent resistance actually defeats entrenched authoritarian power. It just doesn't happen. Nonviolence works because it focuses on raising a mass of people who are responsive. Martin Luther King Jr. in Letters from a Birmingham Jail pointed out that the worst enemy is not the Klan, it's the moderate pastors who were saying, let's accommodate it. When government does not understand what is happening, or when it is the problem, protest demands, resistance demands that we call it out. We have a responsibility to call out our friends. We have an obligation to hold our allies accountable. But that accountability has to come with not just complaint, but instructions for what it should look like. And so if this is happening, I'm not here, but whatever it is you're seeing, make sure you are talking about it. Do not presume that others know what you know or that they see what you see. Part of the 10 steps of sharing and organizing and mobilizing means making sure you're going down to City Hall saying, you may not know this, but when we do X and you do Y, you're giving our shared opponent more power. I misquote it, but never attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence. And in this case, I would not presume that the intervention that is harmful is designed to be beneficial to the opposition. It may simply be the only way they know how to think about things. We are all in this for the first time in our generation. And even people in power have no idea what they're doing. They are making it up as they go along. And so sometimes we have to presume that we've got to help them along. And that feels inadequate because you're the police, you're the mayor, you're the city council, you're the people in charge. I've been in those places. I used to write SOPs for the City of Atlanta Police Department. I shouldn't have written any of that stuff. My point being, we should not presume that what is happening is what was intended. But we should also not presume that they cannot be better if we hold them accountable. And that means not just focusing our 10 steps to freedom and power on the authoritarian fascist regime, but on our friends as well. Because they have to be called to account. They cannot perform and not do the job that we need them to do. I may not get invited back to LA, so lovely to see you all.
Wait.
So we have our marching orders, everyone.
Yes, but wait, I just want to say one thing. First of all, Lisa Ling, thank you so much for bringing Stacey's points to the fore. Also, Stacey, I can never thank you enough. Every time you're out here, please come by to Writer's Block. We'll fill up the Writers Guild for you. Secondly, but everybody please stay in your seats so that Stacey and Lisa can go down the aisle. I ask that for security reasons, for their ease and comfort and ours. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.